One of the vice chair of our board, Freddie Haynes from Dallas, Texas, who's here. Let me continue with some questions. Oh yeah, our speaker for today at the luncheon, H. Beecher Hicks, Washington, D.C., Metropolitan Baptist Church.
Ain't nobody gonna answer Reverend Jackson's question?
Yeah.
Oh, please. Somebody want did he ask a question?
His question was, how do you deal with a black president that y'all afraid to question?
That's when I said prophetic distance. When I made that point, prophetic distance, that's what I'm talking about. The prophet has to stand back and say that, as Reverend Jackson said, my allegiance is to God and not to someone who has been elected who might do the right thing and who might not. And that's so very fundamental because preachers and a whole lot of black folk still trying to be somebody because we've been put down so much. We get too enamored of these photo ops and folk grinning at us. We need to stand back, and particularly as preachers, and remember that our responsibility is to serve the least of these, to bring good news to the poor. And if that means that we will not be able to have a photo op with the president, then we have to be willing to accept that. And you all should hold your ministers responsible as to whether their allegiance is to serving the gospel or serving their own ego and their own status and their own statures. I'm here to tell you, most ministers that I know, they're too concerned about their own ego and their status and their stature, and they're not going to stand up and do the hard thing.
But I think it also piggybacks on what we talked about earlier with Opie and myself, that to stay in your lane and stay in your agenda, you have to have a lane and you have to have an agenda. And what we have to be very clear on is what's our agenda at this particular time. And I think that's become clouded and kind of diffused. So we need to come up with a black church agenda that continues. I mean, we had a civil rights agenda, now we have a president. What's going to be our 21st century agenda? Is it the same? Or maybe it needs to be refreshed. You have new players at the table, you have a new generation emerging that wasn't at the old table. And so you have to put them at the table and create an agenda that's relevant and real.
And I would also like to say is that I think when we look at what happened in the election with the situation with Reverend Jeremiah Wright, is that what happens when the prophet begins to speak like Jeremiah or Isaiah, and when a leader is forced to differ with the prophet. And I think it was profound what Reverend Jesse Jackson said about, I wish you would write that book, My President, My Brother, because the community might be in a love affair with my brother, but they have not understood the danger of my Pharaoh, which is not so much a personality, but a principle and an office that continues to enslave us.
I would suggest as we develop what our agenda might be such that the president is compelled, we go out and force him to do it, as you suggested in your example. What is crucial is that we inculcate in this generation moral courage. Reverend Jackson will join us at Riverside Church on Saturday evening as we commemorate Dr. King's assassination. And I recently, in a program with Professor Randall Balmer, who teaches at Barnard College, who has done some of the most intriguing writing on the way in which presidents from JFK through George W. Bush have had faith, quote, unquote, in the White House. When he was there lecturing with us, Professor Balmer made a profound point, a point that I know Reverend Jackson and others lived. That is to say, in 64 and 5, the prophet, Dr. King, collaborated with the president for various civil rights legislation. But 3 years later, in the chancel of the Riverside Church, Dr. King came out against President Johnson's war, and in some sense effectively signed his death certificate that day. And so the question that Randall Balmer asked of us, and I ask of us as well, do we have moral courage enough not to be inebriated with access to this White House? Are we drunk on potential access and the fear that we might lose access if we say certain kinds of things?
And not only that, let's look at this. Sunday in my church, there were members with Obama shirts on in worship. How do we critique a president to our members who are enamored, turned on by, emotionally invested in, and there's some wavering going on right now as it relates to will we attend the UN conference on race? Will black preachers challenge the president, especially in the face of our members who are sitting on the front row with huge Obama images on their chest? Do we have that kind of moral courage? Because right now it's like we're stuck in between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, you have our members who are just inspired, emotionally invested. On the other hand, you have a group of us who are determined to be cheerleaders for the president so we maintain access. And we don't critique prophetically with some kind of integrity. And so, and then we saw this. Professor this week, Renita Williams, said that in the Democratic primary, President Obama basically used the black church to help get the nomination. And then after the nomination, basically ignored. Yeah.
Dr. Haynes, if I can just underscore what you said, I think there's a possibility for speaking prophetically against David or the president, but we've got some good practice opportunities before us. It talks about incumbency and how incumbency is hard to beat in politics. Here we are in New York City on the eve of a mayoral election, and we've seen prominent preachers endorse all across the country favorite candidates. But before we can effectively keep Barack Obama accountable, and if we stick to the language of class, we've got some good practice targets before us. I'll give you an example. Two brothers in a room with National Action Network have spoke out against Rent-A-Center and their business practices in the ghetto. As a result of their press conference, guess who Rent-A-Center hired as their spokesperson? So before we can speak prophetically against the president, I think we've got some good practice opportunities with some of our celebrities.
But let me say something on that. I think that as we discussed this, picking up on Bishop George's piece, we've also got to be honest with the clergy. During the election, they put us in a bind. Us, I'm talking about the civil rights. If Reverend Jackson or someone said something against Obama, it was generational. If I said something, we were jealous. So, I mean, we locked ourselves into a position where we were rendered, you know, that if we said something, we weren't worried about Obama as much as we were Negroes that had already given us a motive for anything we said. So now we just had the education secretary upstairs. We started questioning, I'm not for mayoral control and other things he's for. Now, how that translates, our community's got to be willing to stand up on policy. And even if they don't, we've got to be courageous enough to stand up on policy. And we cannot afford for them to play distractive games. So Joe Lowry is 90 and all right with the White House. That's all right. Reverend Jackson ain't even 70 and it's a generation problem. That's sick. We watch Larry King every night. He's 72. I mean, so I think that we've allowed them to distract us. And we've got to heal that in our own groups. And I think some of us fell into that because I think some of us wanted to go with where the crowd was going. But the crowd was not necessarily, the same crowd will turn on all of us if this economy keeps botting them out and they don't have anything but the Obama t-shirt to wear to church.
I think it's very important to raise what Freddie mentioned, and I think this is serious. In the light of the Obama mania that has captured the African American community, where do you find a place to be heard by the black church? Where do you find a place? I mean, let's be honest. A preacher who tomorrow morning goes to his church and decides to do the critique I'm not talking about the academy, I'm talking about a pastor.
Right.